صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بارے دیگر صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ازا کا فرش بسر عز و شان رکھتے ہیں. ازا کا فرش بسر عز و شان رکھتے ہیں. زمین پہ عرش اولا کا مکان رکھتے ہیں. زمین پہ عرش اولا کا مکان رکھتے ہیں. ازا حسین کی کرتے ہیں ہر نماز کے بعد. علی کے شیعہ بڑیان بان ازا حسین کی کرتے ہیں ہر نماز کے بعد. علی کے شیعہ بڑیان بان رکھتے ہیں. ازا کا فرش بسط عز و شان رکھتے ہیں. صلوات نہیں ہے ڈر ہمیں محشر کی دھوپ کا کوئی. نہیں ہے ڈر ہمیں محشر کی دھوپ کا کوئی. لیوائے حمد کا غم صاحبان رکھتے ہیں. ازا کا فرش بسط عز و شان رکھتے ہیں. سوال ہے کربلا کا تسلسل امام عصر کی فوج. ہے کربلا کا تسلسل امام عصر کی فوج. جوانوں کو علی اکبر جوان رکھتے ہیں. ازا کا فرش بسط عز و شان رکھتے ہیں. سجا کے چاند ستاروں سے کچھ حسین الفاظ زمین شیر پہ غم آسمان رکھتے ہیں
ماشاءاللہ
جہاد کرتے ہیں غیبت کے دور میں ایسے ہم اپنے صبر سے امن و امان رکھتے ہیں خدا سے مانگتے ہیں جو بھی وہ ہم کو ملتا ہے کوئی وسیلہ مگر خدا سے مانگتے ہیں جو بھی وہ ہم کو ملتا ہے کوئی وسیلہ مگر درمیان جو کرتے رہتے ہیں ماں کی گود میں ماتم وہ طفل کرب و بلا کی اٹھان رکھتے ہیں بتا دیا سرے میدان جواب اصغر نے کہ بے زبان بھی منہ میں زبان رکھتے ہیں امام عصر کا کرتے ہیں ذکر ایسے کمر زمین پہ رہ کے فلک کی اڑان عزا کا فرش بسد عز و شان رکھتے ہیں
دیگر صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد
حرم رسول کے جاتے قید خانے کو حرم رسول کے جاتے قید خانے کو کچھ اور سننے کو کچھ اور سہنے کو دکھ اور غم اٹھانے کو زبان حال سے ذکر رقم سنانے کو نئی زمین پر نئی کربلا بنانے کو نئی زمین پر نئی کربلا بنانے کو اب اور پھیلے گی دنیا میں داستان حسین کہ خود صدائے سلاسل ہے ترجمان حسین سکینہ شام کے زندہ میں تھی علم سے نڈھال کبھی چچا کا تصور کبھی پدر کا خیال کبھی رباب سے باتیں کبھی پھوپھی سے مکال کبھی خاموش کبھی عابد عظیم سے سوال چچا کب آئیں گے دریا سے لوٹ کر بھیا یہاں سے نہر کا ہے کس قدر سفر بھیا یہاں سے نہر کا ہے کس قدر سفر بھیا میں کربلا میں رہی منتظر نہیں آئے زمین لین لے گئے میرے گوہر نہیں آئے جلا دیے گئے ہم سب کے گھر نہیں آئے صدائیں دیتی رہی میں مگر نہیں آئے صدائیں دیتی رہی میں مگر نہیں آئے ہوائیں سرد ترائی میں جب ملی ہوں گی تھکے ہوئے تھے بہت نیند آ گئی ہوگی تھکے ہوئے تھے بہت نیند آ گئی ہوگی تڑپتی رہتی تھی معصوم یوں ہی شام و سحر تسلیاں اسے دیتے تھے عابد مضطر رباب روتی تھی بچی کی ننھی باتوں پر نگاہ آس سے تکتی تھی زینب بے کس نگاہ آس سے تکتی تھی زینب بے کس پیام مرگ بنی دل کی بے کلی آخر چچا کے پاس بھتیجی چلی گئی آخر چچا کے پاس بھتیجی چلی گئی آخر حرم رسول کے
نعرہ تکبیر نعرہ تکبیر اللہ اکبر نعرہ رسالت یا رسول اللہ نعرہ رسالت یا رسول اللہ نعرہ حیدری نعرہ حیدری محمد و آل محمد بلندتر صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد سورہ فاتحہ بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا يحسبن الذين كفروا أنما نملي لهم خير لأنفسهم إنما نملي لهم ليزدادوا إثما ولهم عذاب صدق الله العلي العظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Imagine the most repressive government conceivable. A rulership whereby all the subjects are kept under the thumb of those in power. That you cannot act, you cannot think, you cannot express yourself unless it has been approved by what the government or the authority or whatever you want to call it have allowed. Now, many of you will be imagining something akin to North Korea, or perhaps something akin to George Orwell's 1984. Classic dystopian novel, right? Where you have some sort of very powerful authority. It has its army, the tanks, the secret police, the Gestapo, the Stasi, whatever they're called, and they patrol the streets. They listen to what you say. They even have some control. In Orwell in 1984 goes to some extent to talk about how they have control even over one's thoughts, and they force you externally into subordination. That's what most of us would think, right? But in the modern world, that's not how it works. That's not how you control a population. That's not how you get your subjects to do what you want. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work anymore. Perhaps a few hundred years ago. But today there are only a few exceptions, and they're usually far less developed countries. So how does it happen in today's day and age? There's a quote from the Italian philosopher Umberto Eco, and he writes on this subject. He says, "Not long ago, if you wanted to seize political power in a country, you merely had to control the army and the police. Today, it is only in the most backward countries that fascist generals are still carrying out coup d'etats, and they still use tanks. Today, the country belongs to the one who controls communication. That is, the media. If you want to hold a subject under your control, you do so by way of the media." And Noam Chomsky has written in his Manufactured Consent, one of his most famous political works, about how the government controls us in the modern world, in democracies, by offering us a certain number of choices which we think give us freedom, absolute freedom to some degree. But in reality, those choices have been very carefully curated, so that whatever one of those that we choose is what the government was happy with in the first place. So the way that you keep a people under wraps is by way of the illusion of freedom. Make them think that they are choosing, because then they won't even think to rebel. And one of the most important techniques which is used in this manipulation of media is the control of the narrative. There are lots of different techniques which are used. You can falsify information, you can character assassinate. There's all sorts of different tricks and tips that people have used throughout the ages. But one of the most important is how you control the way facts are delivered. Even if we assume the facts that are being given are authentic and are well sourced, and very often when we look at reputable news agencies, that's what we'll find. But controlling the narrative is essentially to give your version of events quicker and louder than anybody else. You provide the context, the bedrock, the framework in which the story takes place. And by doing so, you have already pre-programmed all those people who are listening to interpret the facts in a certain way. This is why very often we find a curation of language to such a fine degree. Because language is the way in which we communicate our thoughts. One of the most important and influential men in the history of public relations, he's known as the father of public relations, also in less complimentary circles, the father of spin. He writes, Edward Bernays, that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate the unseen mechanism of society and constitute an invisible government whereby the true power lies. And he goes on to say that we are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. And it is they who pull the wires, and it is they who control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and to guide the world. And unlike Chomsky, who was trying to warn people about the dangers of this approach, Edward Bernays, he took it to his absolute potential. He was involved in the Anti-Fruit Company, he was involved in big tobacco, and in General Electric. Very influential man of the last century, unscrupulous, unfortunately. But this is theoretical talk. Right? We can understand this and we can appreciate it. Okay, fine, it seems to make sense, logically it's coherent, the arguments are fair, it's from reputable sources. How about in action? How important is the control of the narrative? I wanted to use the example of the United States, because everybody is aware of them, and they are perhaps held up as the leaders of the free world, shining example of democracy, lover of peace, of freedom, and of liberty. Right? That's what we're classically told. That's what Hollywood will have us believe. That is what we're constantly told over and over again in the media, even the most reputable sources. You turn on BBC, immediately they will start referring to the president, even when it's Donald Trump, they will call him the leader of the free world. Right? I wanted to give 4 facts and 3 examples to show how this narrative has been falsified. Because once that narrative is in our minds, and it is implanted from a young age, and then every fact that we come across which is new, we interpret in the context of what we already know. But by understanding how falsified the context is, only then can we manipulate, and only then can we pierce through the manipulation that has been put at our doors. 4 facts. The United States has been present since 1776, about 245 years. How many years of those 245 were the US not at war? 15. 15 years out of almost 3 centuries, 230 of which they have been at war. Now, some of them were important, some of them during the independence, but most of them were not. We heard a lot of talk about Russian interference in US elections. There was a big deal made out of it. Biden made a lot of claims about how derogatory it would be, how much of a blow to democracy it would be if the US were to engage in election fraud. But alas, there are a number of studies, there's one from Harvard, which looks at the fact that more than 80 manipulations of foreign elections have taken place in the last 50 or so years. In Latin America, there have been about 40 interventions, not including coup d'etats, again, over the last half century or so, last 75 years or so. And there was quite an embarrassment from the CIA when a government document was leaked, a 19-page manifesto teaching people how to torture. And it goes in graphic detail as to what tools to use, how to extract information, and how to kill people while making it look like an accident. And those who are interested, the CIA is particularly a particularly enterprising organization when you look at what they have done in terms of regime change. But okay, fine. The methods are impure, but at least they like democracy. At least the US government, I'm not talking about the US people, the US government. At least they like democracy, right? At least they are pro people choosing their own destiny. Well, 3 examples to show how much they care for democracy once you vote the wrong way. Democracy, yes, absolutely, so long as you vote in our favor. The moment you go against us, that's when things get a little bit boring. First example, 1951. Arbenz, he wanted to fight, this is Guatemala, he wanted to fight against the United Fruit Company, which had a monopoly of all fruit trade in the area, exploitative, and he wanted to expand workers' rights and to try and make things a little bit more fair. There was a coup d'etat, which was largely orchestrated by the US government. Because it's a certain time after the event, the documents eventually become declassified. It's not controversial. So what happened? There was a coup d'etat, a military general went in power, and he killed thousands and thousands of people. 30,000 people went missing or were found dead as a result. It was a democracy, it was a democratically elected leader. Perhaps a more famous example, 1953, Mohammad, the democratically elected leader of Iran. He wanted to nationalize the oil companies. Churchill and Eisenhower, they weren't having it. What did they do? Operation Ajax. They replaced him, the democratically elected leader, put him under house arrest for the rest of his life, and put an oppressive Shah in power. one whose secret police and government was rank with human rights abuses. Or perhaps the most stark example of all, in Chile in 1973, when Allende, he wanted to reform the country. It was a long, shining example of democracy in South America for many, many years. And Allende, he had been in government office for 40 years plus. When he came to power, again, they voted for the wrong people. How dare they? What happened? They actually bombed Chile. And they bombed the government building in which he was hiding, the symbol of democracy in Chile. And when he was about to be captured, when he was about to be killed as the Americans were bombing, he put out one final broadcast, and it's available. You can listen to the audio, it's quite harrowing. But he says, "Workers, I have faith in Chile and its destiny. Go forward knowing that sooner rather than later, avenues will open along which free men will walk to build a better society. Long live Chile, long live the people, and long live the workers." Before he killed himself, rather than fall into enemy hands. And again, as is the classic pattern, a despot came in power, Pinochet, who massacred thousands of people. I'm not sure if anyone's ever heard the expression of throwing people out of helicopters. It came from Pinochet. Anyone who was a political dissident, they'd be taken up high in a helicopter, their stomachs would be cut open, and they'd be tossed out, just because you were against the regime. And they were supported by the United States government for a long period of time. Now, when you put some of these facts together, then you begin to understand how false this narrative is. In the light of overwhelming facts, no matter how much control you try and exert on the narrative, it tends to break down. And that's one of the best ways to counter these illusions and this spin, is to go against it with a certain amount of truth. When you have undeniable facts, then there is no way that it can overcome. No matter how much spin you put on, eventually the truth, it comes out. And the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was very aware of this. He was acutely concerned with this. Indeed, when you look at his life, during his prophethood in particular, right from when he first declared his leadership at Da'watul Ashira to his family members, he made the position of Imam Ali salawatullahi wa salam he made it very clear. He asked, as Bukhari reports in his Tariq, who will come forward as my wasi, my brother, and my khalif. Right from the beginning, he made it the case. And throughout his prophethood, he made multiple allusions to the importance and the position of Ahlul Bayt, towards members specifically, but also to the Ahlul Bayt generally. So, for example, he said in Al-Hakim al-Mustadrak that the Ahlul Bayt, they are like Safinatul Najah, or the Ark of Salvation. Those who go upon them, who go towards them, they will be saved. Those who go away from them, they will be destroyed. And we have multiple examples. Hadith al-Thaqalayn, right? The Holy Prophet, he stands and he says that I will leave behind two weighty things, the Quran and my Ahlul Bayt. And there are some who are trying to sort of pollute the Hadith and trying to say that no, the Thaqalayn is the Quran and the Sunnah. But it's authentic sources, there's no doubt about it. Sahih Muslim, book 31, Hadith 5920. It's very clear that the Ahlul Bayt are the second of the Thaqalayn. Another example is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala codified in the Quran. And there's so many ayat, again, it's too much for tonight's discussion to look at all of them. But the ayah of Mubarak, Surah 3, verse number 61, right near the end of the mission of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa He has many companions, he has many wives, he is well established. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to him, bring yourselves, and they will bring themselves, bring your women, they will bring their women, bring your sons, and they will bring their sons. And the plural in this verse, Surah 3, verse number 61, is for 3+. In Arabic you have single, you have dual, and then you have the plural, which is 3 only. And despite that injunction and the plural in the Quran, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he takes only Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussain alayhi salam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
And again, it's one of those things which is sort of dusted under the carpet. We don't hear about it very much. But again, authentic sources. Sahih Muslim, book 31, hadith 5950. All 5 of them are mentioned. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also in the ayah of Tadhir. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not happy alone with the Holy Prophet establishing their status. He also mentions it in the Quran. But he also makes an exception for Rasul. No prophet who ever came, no messenger that came before, ever asked for a price, ever asked for a wage, ever asked for compensation. And even Rasulullah at the beginning of his mission, when he was asked, he said no. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for you, Ya Rasulullah, for your Ahlul Bayt, there is an exception. He says in Surah 42, verse number 23, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. I ask of you nothing but love and mawadda, not mahabba. Mahabba is to say that you love. Mawadda is to love so deep that it manifests in your action. You act on the love. Simply saying it is not enough. And of course we have that famous hadith of kisa, which was recited very well at the beginning of the Majlis. Now, on hadith of kisa, just a slight side note. There are some questions which have been raised recently about the authenticity of hadith of kisa. Some people say that the hadith of kisa is not authentic, that there was no such event. But people who are making this claim, there's no, they haven't looked at the classic literature. Because both from the resources of the school of Ahlebait and the school of Ahl Sunnah, the evidence is undeniable. The hadith of kisa is mentioned over and over and over again. From Shia sources, you have so many. You have, for example, you have it in so many of the tafasir, you have it in Sheikh Bahrani, Ibn Tawus, so many of the great scholars of old, Bahar al-Anwar, by Majlis, so many, they mention the hadith of kisa over and over again. In various imams, they make reference to it. But also from the books of our brothers in the school of Ahl Sunnah, it is also a very established tradition. We read in Sahih Muslim, in the chapter of the merits of Ahlul Bayt, and it is narrated by Aisha, one of the wives of Rasul, that she said that Rasulullah went out one morning wearing a black cloak of camel's hair, and Hassan ibn Ali came under it, then Imam Hussain alayhi salam, then Bibi Fatima, then Imam Ali alayhi salam.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
But that's not enough. Alone, that's not enough for hadith kisa, because hadith kisa, there's a beautiful extra layer to it. Because Rasulullah, by taking them all under the cloak, he says these 5 people under this cloak, they are special. They are special, they are different not only in degree but also of time. But in the hadith of kisa, he also takes his own words and he links them with the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Muslim narrates, as Aisha narrates in Sahih Muslim, that after he brought them all under the cloak, he said, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And it is replete throughout the books of Ahl Sunnah. Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, he records it. Ibn Kathir, Ibn Taymiyyah even records its authenticity. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Fakhruddin al-Razi, so on and so forth. It's a well narrated hadith. Now, there is some controversy which has been raised about the exact wording of the ahadith, particularly the one in Mafatih al-Jinn. Is the wording of the hadith exactly the same as that? That is where the controversy lies, and there is controversy to be had. There are arguments to be had. But again, sometimes we get so lost in the details, we forget the essence. Because we get so focused on the particulars that we don't realize what the greater message is. Okay, even if things didn't happen in that exact order, even if those precise things didn't happen in that exact way, every important element of hadith al-kisa is there. Who were under the kisa, what the verse of the Quran that Rasulullah stated, and the overall message that these people were raised above all of the people of the world. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he put this emphasis throughout his life. Why? Because it was important to put the facts there. Because he knew after him there would be those that would manipulate the narrative. Because no matter how much spin you put on the context of events, if enough facts bleed through, and they inevitably do, then the narrative can be challenged, the narrative can be changed. And we know this because the Banu Umayyah, when they came in power, their propaganda machines were relentless. They never stopped, they never slept, they were consistent. At least from the time of Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan. And what's quite interesting is that so entrenched was their propaganda and so absurd were some of the claims that posterity showed how foolish they were. Maqrizi and Ibn al-Hadith in Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, they both record that when the Banu Umayyah were defeated by the Banu Abbas, the people of Syria, the people of Sham, they were confused. Why? Because they had always been told that the Banu Umayyah were Ahlul Bayt. SubhanAllah. That the cursed tree of the Quran was actually the closest to Rasul. So when the Banu Abbas came in power, they actually were from the family of the Prophet in one respect. The Prophet's uncle Abbas, they were from his descendants. So when they came forward, the people of Sham were really confused. It didn't make sense to them. That was how deeply entrenched their propaganda machines had been. And if you want evidence, look no further than the position of Imam Ali sallallahu wa sallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
It is one of those unspoken facts of history. What happened to the name of Imam Ali alayhi salam? This great companion of the Prophet, respected by all Muslims, one of the, even according to our brothers in the school of Ahl Sunnah, one of the four rightfully guided Khulafa, the brother of the Prophet, the cousin of the Prophet, the son-in-law of the Prophet. What happened? This man who saved Islam on so many occasions, whether it was at Badr or Uhud, the one who slept in the bed of the Holy Prophet, the one who supported him when no one else was there, the one who managed to bring the water in when they were in the shape of Abu Bakr, the one who revealed verses of the Quran. When the verses of Surah Tawbah were given to the first Khalifa, Imam Ali alayhi salam had to go and take them away from him and reveal them himself. This was the position of Imam Ali alayhi salam. But the wheels of Banu Umayyah's propaganda machine were turning so much that after his passing, they would, in fact it was even before he passed away, they would begin to curse Imam Ali alayhi salam from the manabir. Imagine, from the minbar, where Rasulullah would give knowledge, where he would give ilm and wisdom, and the religion of Islam was extolled, from that same pulpit, the name of Imam Ali, its greatest supporter, its greatest pillar, was cursed. And again, it's one of those undeniable facts of history. People don't know about it very much because it's conveniently not spoken about. Because when you talk about Muawiyah's cursing of Imam Ali alayhi salam, then it leads on to some uncomfortable questions, particularly concerning the impeccability of the Sahaba. What are some of the evidences? Probably the most important, the one which doesn't require the most historical analysis, is Sahih Muslim. Again, so Sahihain, all of the ahadith in the Sahihain, they are accepted by our brothers in the school of Ahl Sunnah. We find in Sahih Muslim, book 31, hadith 5950. Muawiyah, he asks Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, one of the companions of the Holy Prophet, casually, no explanation, no introduction, why don't you curse Ali ibn Abi Talib? Now what kind of an odd question is that, right? You have this great stalwart, this luminary of Islam, why don't you curse him? If someone asks in a narration, why don't you curse Rasulullah? What's the immediate assumption? Why on earth are you asking this question? The only way you can ask such a foolish question is if it is an established practice. And this comparison, by the way, to Rasulullah is not by me. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi himself, he said, whoever curses Ali has cursed you. As is reported in the Hadis, Mustafa. And in Sahih Muslim as well, he says to Imam Ali alayhi salam that no one will love you except a mu'min and no one will hate you except he is the Mizan, Imam Ali alayhi salam. And he was cursed. And there's lots of other historical sources. You can look at Shabbir, Imran, you can look at Al-Tabari, so on and so forth. But it evidences the power of the Umayyad propaganda machine and how important it was for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi to combat it. But not by spin, not by manipulation of their own, but simply by being Ahlul Bayt and allowing the light of their actions to shine. Because this was the way that they taught Islam. They didn't go around knocking on doors trying to argue with people. to try and convince them. Perhaps there is a place for that. I'm not speaking down upon that, but the great light of Rasul was from his akhlaq and from his actions. When we look at Imam Ali, salawatullahi wa salamuhu, when he kills Amr ibn Abd Wud, and Amr's sister comes out from the tent.